The town of Cinder Creek had a saying. Some men are born wrong. They didn't mean ugly. They didn't mean poor. They meant something deeper, something that settled in the bones of a community like rot in old timber. They meant men who made decent folks uncomfortable without ever drawing a weapon. Men who existed at the edges of things. Men like Elias Cord. He came down from the mountains twice a year. Once in spring to trade his pelts and buy flour and salt. Once in autumn for reasons nobody could quite explain. He never drank in the saloon. Never started trouble. Never looked at a woman sideways. He paid fare, spoke little, and disappeared back into the high country like smoke pulled into sky. And yet, every mother in Cinder Creek pulled her daughter closer when Elias Cord rode through. Every father found somewhere else to be. Children were ushered indoors. Dogs were hushed. The whole town seemed to hold one long, collective breath until his mule crested the ridge and vanished. Nobody could tell you why, exactly. He was large. That was part of it. Broad through the shoulders like a barn door, with hands that could cup a man's skull the way most men hold an apple. His face was weathered dark from altitude and wind, and he had these eyes, pale gray, almost colorless, that seemed to see things just a moment before they happened. But he had never hurt anyone in Cinder Creek. Not once. So when Clara May Ashford announced she was going to marry him, this man nobody wanted, this mountain ghost, the town didn't just talk. The town erupted. Her father threatened to disown her. The preacher refused to perform the ceremony. 3 men she turned down over the years suddenly found their courage and their opinions all at once. Clara May listened to every single one of them. Then she rode up that mountain anyway. What nobody knew, what Clara herself didn't know yet, was what waited for her inside that cabin. What he had been building up there in the silence, alone, for years. And when she finally saw it, her whole understanding of this man, this wrong man, this feared man, cracked open like an egg. The road out of Cinder Creek split at the old cottonwood tree, dead and bone-white, its bare arms reaching toward a sky the color of hammered copper. Left Fork went south, toward Redemption City and its promise of railroad money and gaslit streets. Right Fork climbed. Clara May took the right fork. She was 26, which in 1874 made her old enough for people to call her a spinster to her face and mean it kindly. She had turned down Thomas Holt, who owned a feed store and smelled like grain dust and self-satisfaction. She had turned down Deputy Cal Morris, who was handsome enough but had that particular cruelty men develop when they're never told no. She had turned down 4 others whose names she could barely remember now, their faces blurring together into one composite portrait of expectation. None of them had ever looked at her the way Elias Cord looked at her. Which was to say, none of them had ever actually looked at her. The first time she noticed Elias was 2 springs past. He'd come in to trade his pelts at Grady's store, and she'd been there buying thread. She remembered the way the room contracted when he entered. The way Grady's smile went stiff and professional. The way the 2 other women shopping had suddenly found urgent business near the far wall. Clara had stayed where she was. She was not fearless. She wanted to be honest about that, at least to herself. Her heart knocked around her chest like something trapped. But she was tired. Tired of fear being the primary language of every interaction she witnessed. Tired of people deciding things about other people before a single word was exchanged. Elias had set his bundle of pelts on the counter, named his price, fair, even generous, and waited. While Grady fumbled with his ledger, Elias turned and saw Clara watching him. He didn't look away quickly, the way men did when caught staring. He held her gaze for exactly as long as was honest, and then he nodded, the way you'd nod at someone you recognized. Someone you respected. Then he collected his payment and left. Clara had thought about that nod for 2 years. She'd asked about him, carefully, casually, the way you ask about a wound you're not sure is yours. What she got back was noise. Dangerous. Strange. Lives up there alone for a reason. The most specific accusation she ever extracted was from old Pete Dawson at the livery, who claimed Elias had once broken a man's arm in the high country, a trapper who'd trespassed on his line. But Pete told it the way he told everything, with that particular relish of a man who'd never been there himself. She found out his full name from the deed registry. Elias Samuel Cord. She found out he'd bought his mountain claim 8 years ago, cash payment, which meant he had come from somewhere with money or had built it himself through those winters she couldn't imagine. She found out he had no warrants. No recorded debts. No known associates. She found out nothing that justified what the town did to his name every time it was spoken. The autumn he came down, she was ready. She didn't engineer an encounter. She simply didn't move when he came into Grady's store. She bought her thread, same as always. And when he nodded at her again, that same honest, recognizing nod, she said, clearly and without performance, "I'm Clara Ashford. I'd be grateful if you'd let me buy you a cup of coffee at May's." The store went silent the way a room goes silent when someone draws a gun. Elias looked at her for a long moment. That pale gray gaze, measuring something she couldn't name. Then he said, voice low and careful as a man stepping onto uncertain ice, "I don't take coffee, Miss Ashford. But I'd accept tea if the offer holds." They sat in May's for 40 minutes. He didn't tell her much about himself. He asked about her, which was different from most men's approach of telling her about themselves until she was supposed to be impressed. He asked what she thought about, what she wanted, what she found worth doing in a town that seemed, he paused here, chose his word, small. She told him the truth, which she hadn't told anyone in years. That she wanted children. That she wanted a life that meant something. That she was desperately afraid of spending the next 40 years becoming someone's afterthought. He listened to every word. When he left, he said he'd be back in spring. He said it the way you state a fact about weather. Certain. Grounded. She nodded, and that was that. In spring, he came back. He asked if she'd be willing to come up the mountain before making any decisions. He said the mountain had to agree to a person as much as a person had to agree to the mountain. He said this without a trace of poetry or performance, just a man reporting something true about his world. Her father screamed. Her friends pleaded. Deputy Morris got drunk at the saloon, and said things that got him talked about for months afterward. Clara packed a bag with 3 days of clothes. 3 days became a week. The week became a month. The month became a letter home saying she was staying, and please send the rest of her things, and she was sorry for the worry but she was not sorry for the choice. She did not write about what she found at the cabin. She wasn't ready to explain it. She was still working out what it meant herself. She was still standing in the back room of that cabin, looking at what Elias Cord had built in the silence and the cold and the long loneliness of those mountain years. Trying to understand the kind of man who could hold that much hope without ever telling a soul. The cabin sat in a natural bowl between 2 ridgelines, sheltered from the worst of the north wind, facing a valley that in summer turned so green it almost looked wrong, too vivid. Like a painting done by someone who'd never seen restraint. A creek ran 40 yards to the east. Pines stood thick to the west. The cabin itself was built from timber Elias had cut and notched himself, every joint tight as a secret. It was not what Clara expected. She'd expected a survivalist's den. Rough and utilitarian, organized around function alone. Animal hides on bare walls. A fire pit and a bedroll and the absolute minimum of everything. What she found was a home someone had been building toward. The main room had a real fireplace, river stone fitted with painstaking care, mortar lines clean and even. A table with 4 chairs, which struck her immediately, 4 chairs for a man who lived completely alone. Shelves on the east wall held books, actual books, their spines cracked and softened from use. She tilted her head, natural philosophy, surveying, botany, a Bible worn thin at the Psalms, 2 novels she recognized and one she didn't. A wood stove in the kitchen corner had a warming shelf above it, and hanging from the rafters were dried herbs she could identify: thyme, sage, yarrow, and some she couldn't. The floor was swept. Not company clean swept. Always swept. She walked slowly, trying to understand the person the room described. Elias had gone to tend his animals, giving her time she hadn't asked for and had needed without knowing it. She moved through the space the way you move through a letter someone wrote without meaning to send. Every detail revealing something. The bedroom was spare. A bed built wide, with a frame of peeled timber, a quilt folded at the foot in a pattern that suggested someone had taken time to choose it. A small mirror on the wall, tilted slightly, the kind of adjustment a man makes when he's tried to check his own face and found the angle wrong. A second lantern hook on the wall beside the first. 2 hooks. Side by side. She stood there for a moment. Then she saw the door. It was at the back of the bedroom, a door she'd initially taken for a storage closet. The latch was a simple wooden peg, nothing special. She hesitated. It felt like reading someone's journal. She lifted the peg anyway. The room beyond was small. Maybe 10 feet by 10 feet. A window had been cut in the north-facing wall, fitted with real glass. The expensive kind, ordered special. The freight alone would have cost more than most men in Cinder Creek earned in a month. Light fell through it clear and steady, hitting the center of the room, where the cradle was. She almost didn't see it at first because her mind refused to process it. It sat on the floor, rocking slightly on its curved runners from some residual vibration in the cabin's floorboards, as if it had just been set down. It was made from birchwood, pale and smooth, the grain rippling through it like water. The side panels were carved, not crudely, not roughly, but with the patience and precision of a man who had nothing but time and had chosen to fill that time with this. Vines. Small birds. Along the headboard, a row of tiny mountains, each one slightly different from the last. Clara sat down on the floor. She didn't cry. She wasn't built for easy tears. But something moved through her chest that she couldn't name, some combination of grief and recognition and a particular kind of loneliness you only feel when you suddenly understand you have not been as alone as you believed. How long had it taken him? Not just to build it, though that was its own staggering thing, all those careful hours, that deliberate love poured into birch and chisel. How long had he carried the idea of it? Up here, alone, in the winters that could keep a man locked inside for weeks, in the silence that would have crushed most men into meanness or madness, he had carved a cradle. He had built towards something he hadn't yet had any reason to believe would come. She was still sitting on the floor when Elias came back in from the animals. She heard his boots on the main room floor, heard him pause when he didn't find her there, heard him move to the bedroom door. She heard him stop. She looked up. He stood in the doorway to the small room, and his face did something complicated, not shame, exactly. Not pride either. Something that lived between the two. His big hands hung at his sides, and for the first time since she'd known him, he looked uncertain. "I should have told you about that room," he said. "How long?" she asked. He was quiet for a long moment, the kind of quiet that is not avoidance but accuracy, a man making sure he says the true thing. "Started it my 4th winter up here," he finally said. I wasn't thinking of anyone specific. I just had the birch, and I had the time, and I had the—" He stopped. Searched for the word. "The wanting of it." "For years," Clara said. 5, come November. She looked back at the cradle. "You never told anyone." "Wasn't anyone to tell." She sat with that for a moment. Then she looked at him again, this large and frightening and careful man standing in a doorway with his uncertain hands, and she thought, the town had it exactly backwards. Every person in Cinder Creek who called this man wrong, who pulled their children away, who crossed the street rather than speak his name in his presence, every single one of them had looked at the surface of Elias' cord and stopped there. Not one of them had climbed the mountain. She pushed herself up from the floor. Walked to the window. Below, the valley held its impossible green. Behind her, she heard him still waiting. "The birds on the side panels," she said. "What kind are they?" "Sparrows," he said. She nodded slowly. "Good choice." He let out a breath that had been held a long time. But Clara didn't know yet what it had cost him to build it. She didn't know about the first cradle, the one before this one. And she didn't know about the man from Cinder Creek who was already riding toward the mountain with a very different kind of purpose, and a very old grievance against Elias Cord. Deputy Cal Morris had a problem that most people in Cinder Creek mistook for a virtue. He never forgot anything. He remembered every slight, every dismissal, every moment where life had arranged itself in a way that left him wanting. He organized these memories the way other men organize their tools, carefully, by purpose, ready to reach for when needed. Most men called this grudge-holding. Cal Morris called it record-keeping. He had two particular records he returned to often. The first involved Elias Cord and a man named Silas Renner, trapper, for years dead. Renner had been Cal's cousin, not close, not particularly liked, but blood, which in Cal's accounting system meant something absolute. Renner had gone up into the high country to work the same fur lines Elias Cord claimed as his own, and had come down with a broken arm, 3 busted ribs, and a story he told differently every time depending on his audience and his level of drink. What everyone agreed on was that Elias Cord's hands had been the cause. Renner died that winter. Not from the injuries, from drink and exposure and the general collapse of a man who'd never been careful about himself. But Cal's memory had quietly, decisively attributed the death to Elias Cord, and nothing in 4 years had dislodged that attribution. The second record involved Clara May Ashford, who had turned down his proposal in the spring of 1872 with a gentleness that had somehow been worse than anger. She'd said she hoped he found someone who suited him better, and the hope in it had stung like salt. Now she was on that mountain. Cal rode out of Cinder Creek on a gray Tuesday morning in late October, 3 weeks after Clara's letter arrived at the Ashford house. He told himself he was conducting a welfare check. He told himself he was doing his duty as a lawman. He had told himself these things often enough that they developed a convincing texture. He brought 2 men with him, Doyle Pitts, the blacksmith's cousin, who was large and simple and did what he was told, and a hired man named Voss who had come through town in September, and had that particular quality of a man who'd done violence before and found it manageable. Voss carried a rifle and a short-barreled pistol and very few opinions about how they were used. The trail up was steeper than Cal had expected. The horses struggled on the switchbacks, and by midday they had dismounted and were leading the animals. The altitude pressed at Cal's temples. He didn't like it up here, the scale of it. The way the mountains made a man feel dimensionally incorrect, like he'd been drawn in 2 dimensions in a world insisting on 3. "What exactly are we doing?" Voss asked, around the 3rd hour of climbing. "Not challenging. Just clarifying. Ensuring Miss Ashford is there of her own free will," Cal said. Voss said nothing, which was agreement enough. What Cal hadn't accounted for was the mountain itself as an early warning system. Elias Cord had lived on that slope for 8 years. He knew its sounds the way a blind man knows a familiar room, by the absence of what should be there. The birds that should be calling. The wind through the particular stand of pine on the south ridge. The quality of silence that was natural silence versus the silence of things holding still because something was moving through them wrong. Elias heard them 2 hours before they reached the cabin. He didn't tell Clara right away. He went about the day's business, firewood, checking the creek where he had fish traps set, inspecting the roof on the lean-to where his mule and 2 horses sheltered. He moved with the deliberate, unhurried quality of a man who has decided his response before the problem arrives, which is the only kind of decision that works. When he came back inside, Clara was at the table mending one of his shirts, and the domesticity of it, the shirt, the needle. This woman in his home doing something so ordinary, struck him like a physical thing. He stood in the doorway a moment too long. She looked up. Read his face. Put down the shirt. What is it? Company coming up, he said. 3 men. One of them is likely your deputy. She went very still. How do you know? Tracks on the South Trail, couple hours back. 3 sets of boots went through the game run at dawn. And, he paused. Morris came up once before. 2 years ago. I didn't answer when he knocked. Something moved across Clara's expression, a complicated weather system of emotions. He came up here? Just the once. Left after an hour. She stood. Elias. What did you do to Silas Renner? He'd been expecting the question. Maybe not today, maybe not this quickly. But he'd known it was coming the way you know a season is turning, not the exact day, but the certainty of it. Renner came onto my line with 3 other men, Elias said. Wasn't the first time. I told him twice before through proper channels, left a written notice at Grady's, which is the custom. 3rd time, I found him with 2 of my traps sprung and skinned and 2 of my marten in his pack. He looked at her directly. I broke his arm. I let him walk away. I should have done neither or one, I know that now. A man who'll steal that bold and walk away from a broken arm with no consequence is a man who'll come back with guns. But he didn't come back. He died instead. And Morris blamed you. Morris needed someone to blame. He said it without contempt. Just accuracy. Grief makes that necessary sometimes. Clara looked at him. This man who had broken a thief's arm and let him walk. This man who had built a cradle in a back room for 5 years. She was trying to hold both things in her hands at once and understand the shape of the person they described together. She was still working on it when they heard the horses in the yard. Cal Morris tied his horse to the porch post with the practiced ease of a man who believed the gesture to be one of many courtesies he was extending. He straightened his coat. Adjusted the badge on his chest until it caught the pale mountain light. Beside him, Doyle shifted his weight from foot to foot like a nervous horse, and Voss stood just to the left and behind, the rifle loose in his hands. Its barrel angled toward the ground with a precision that suggested it could be raised in less than a breath. The cabin door opened before Cal could knock. Elias Cord filled the frame. Not aggressively, he simply occupied the space the way large things occupy space, completely and without apology. He wore no gun belt. His hands were visible, resting at his sides open. Morris, he said. Cord. Cal let his eyes move past Elias, scanning what he could see of the interior. Clara Ashford here? Clara Cord, Elias said. Yes. Something happened in Cal's jaw. A tightening. That's. I wasn't aware the marriage had been formalized. Month ago. Preacher came up from Ridgeline. Elias said it the way he said most things, not to wound, but not protecting against it either. You've ridden a long way, Morris. What is it you need? Cal's eyes came back to his. I need to speak with her directly. A pause that had weight in it. Then Elias stepped aside. Clara was at the table. She had composed herself, not into coldness, but into a kind of clarity. She was wearing her own clothes, her own boots. She looked, Cal noted with a frustration he tried to suppress, entirely healthy. More than that. There was something settled about her, a quality he hadn't seen in Cinder Creek, as if some chronic tension had been released. Clara, he said. Cal. Her voice was even. You've met my husband. Cal stepped inside. Voss remained at the door, which meant he remained in Elias's peripheral vision at all times. Elias was aware of this. Clara could tell by the particular stillness of his posture. Doyle stayed outside with the horses. Your father is worried, Cal said. The whole town. I wrote to my father, Clara said. I told him I was well. I told him I was happy. I told him I would visit in spring. She folded her hands on the table. Is there a law against marrying a man and living on his property, Cal? There's no law, Cal said. But there are questions about Cord's character that warrant. What questions? Cal's gaze moved to Elias, who had taken a position by the fireplace, leaning against the stone surround with his arms crossed. Not threateningly. Just present. Immovably present. Silas Renner, Cal said. The room was very quiet. The fire was the only thing moving. Renner trespassed and stole, Elias said. 3 occasions documented. 3rd occasion, I use force proportional to the theft. No law was broken by my accounting or the county's. He died, Cal said, and the 2 words carried everything, the grief, the blame, the years of storage, all of it compressed into 4 syllables. He died from choices he made across a lifetime, Elias said. Not unkindly. Steadily, the way you hold a lamp in the dark, not to blind anyone, just to show what's there. I'm sorry for your loss, Morris. I've said that to myself more times than you know. But I did not kill your cousin. Renner killed Renner. And you know it. Something in Cal's face broke briefly, not collapsed, just cracked, like ice under pressure, and for just a moment, the thing underneath was visible. Not rage. Something more devastating. He looked like a man who had traveled a very long way to be told something he already knew. Then the moment closed. His expression reset into its official hardness. I'd like 5 minutes alone with Clara, he said. No, Elias said. Simple. No apology for it. No elaboration. Cal's hand moved toward his belt, not to draw, just the unconscious gesture of a man accustomed to that being the conversation ender. But Clara spoke first. Cal. Her voice dropped to something that was not soft but was direct, the way a good doctor is direct when kindness would waste precious time. Listen to me. I am here because I chose to be here. I am here because this man. She gestured toward Elias without looking away from Cal. Is the first person in my life who asked me what I wanted before assuming he already knew. I am here because I looked at this mountain and I looked at that town and I made a choice that is mine to make. She paused. If you respect me at all, you'll take that. If you don't, what you do next will tell me everything I need to know about whether I was right to turn you down. Cal stood very still. Outside, the wind moved through the pines with a sound like distant water. Then he looked at Elias. Man to man, across the small room, with all of its layered history and accumulated grievance between them. And Elias looked back with those pale gray eyes that didn't threaten and didn't yield. She leaves any time she wants, Cal said. Anything prevents that. I'll be back with more men and proper authority. She leaves any time she wants, Elias agreed. That was always true. Cal nodded once. Turned to Clara. And for just a moment, he looked not like a deputy or a wronged man or an old suitor, but like someone who was very tired and had traveled a long way for a conclusion that had always been arriving. Take care of yourself, he said. I intend to, Clara said. He left. His horse's hooves rang down the trail and faded into the mountains in different silence. Voss followed without a word. Doyle after him. Clara let out a long breath. Elias pushed off the fireplace. That won't be the last of it, he said. She looked at him. I know. Neither of them knew yet how right he was, or what the last of it would actually look like when it finally came. November came to the mountain like a sentence being passed. The first snow fell on a Sunday, and by Monday morning the world had been remade in white and blue silence, every familiar landmark translated into something half-recognized, half-dreamed. Clara stood at the window of the main room and watched it with the complex feeling of someone who has made an irreversible decision and is only now beginning to understand its full dimensions. She was pregnant. She had been fairly certain for 3 weeks, and completely certain for 1. She had not told Elias yet, and she was not entirely sure why, not fear, exactly. Something more like the desire to hold the knowledge privately for a little longer, to turn it over in the quiet of her own mind before it became a shared thing. before it became real in that external way that makes everything accelerate. In those 3 weeks, she had learned things about mountain living that no amount of imagination in Cinder Creek could have prepared her for. She learned that water froze in the pail by the door before dawn and had to be broken with the handle of the axe. She learned that the woodpile was a relationship you maintained with the constant attention and respect you'd give a difficult but necessary person. She learned that the silence up here was not empty, it was full, stratified and complex, different at midnight than at mid-morning, different in snow than in wind. And that Elias read it the way educated men read text, extracting information from its variations continuously. She learned that he had nightmares. Not often. Twice in the weeks she'd been sleeping beside him. He didn't thrash or cry out, that wasn't his way. He went very still, more still than natural sleep, and his breathing changed, becoming shallow and controlled in a way that was clearly trained rather than instinctive. She lay beside him and watched the muscles in his jaw work and wondered what he was holding himself still inside of. She didn't ask? Not yet. She was learning the pace of him, that there was information he would offer in his own time, in the right conditions, and that pushing only caused him to seal the thing more completely. The way applying heat to certain materials hardens rather than softens them. She was learning patience from a man who was its living argument. On the 5th day of snow, he asked her to help him with something in the workshop, a small structure he'd built onto the cabin's east side, sheltered under a continuation of the main roof. She'd seen it but hadn't gone in. He'd never invited her before today. It was the woodworking space. Organized with the same precision as everything else of his, tools hung in order on the wall, planes and chisels and gouges each in their place, the workbench clean. And on the bench was the beginning of something she couldn't immediately identify. A long curved piece of wood, pale and fine-grained, its surface plain to a satin finish. "What is it?" she asked. "Chair," he said. "Rocking chair. For the—" He stopped. Adjusted. "For the main room." She looked at the curve of it. At the particular way it was shaped. She thought about the cradle in the back room, its runners, their gentle arc. She looked up at him. He met her eyes and held them. And then he said very quietly, "Or for a woman who's going to need somewhere comfortable to sit, come summer." The air between them changed temperature. "You know," she said. "I notice," he said. Which was all the explanation he'd give for however he noticed, some combination of observation and intuition so practiced it had become indistinguishable from knowing. She felt tears threaten and denied them the satisfaction. "I was going to tell you. I was just taking your time," he said. "That's all right. Are you—" She stopped. Started again. "Is this what you wanted?" He was quiet for a moment in that precise, careful way of his. "Wanted isn't big enough," he said. "I've been building toward it for a long time. Before I had any reason to." He looked at the curved wood on the bench. "Before I knew you." She thought about that cradle. 5 years of winters. All those hours of carving while the snow sealed him in up here, alone, building toward a life he had no evidence was coming. The faith required for that, not religious faith, but something harder and more secular, a faith based purely on the decision to keep wanting even when wanting seemed delusional. She reached out and put her hand over his where it rested on the workbench. His hand turned and closed around hers, and the size of it, the warmth of it, was something she allowed herself, fully, for the first time. They stood like that for a while, in the small woodworking room with the snow pressing quiet against the walls. That night, she woke to his stillness. The nightmare, or whatever it was. She lay in the dark and listened to the trained shallowness of his breathing and made a decision. She put her hand on his chest, very gently. Felt his heartbeat. Fast and guarded. "Elias," she said softly. He came awake without the startle of a guilty man, more like someone surfacing from cold water. His eyes were open, adjusted to the dark immediately, those pale gray eyes finding her face. "Tell me sometime," she said. Not now. Sometime. He was quiet for a long time. Long enough that she thought he wouldn't. There was a first cradle, he finally said. She kept very still. Before this one. Built of my second winter. 4. He stopped. Started again. I was married before. Very briefly. She came with me when I first claimed the land. She was. The sentence didn't finish itself cleanly. She didn't live through the second winter. Clara closed her eyes. The baby neither, he said. She moved closer to him in the dark, not speaking. There was nothing to say that the closeness didn't say better. She felt the careful machinery of him, this man who had survived losing everything and then built it all over again in wood and hope and quiet industry, slowly begin to release. Outside, the snow kept falling. What neither of them knew was that Cal Morris, back in Cinder Creek, had been talking to men with worse intentions than his own. And one of those men had a particular reason to want Elias Cord off that mountain, a reason that had nothing to do with broken arms or dead cousins, and everything to do with what was buried in the high meadow on the eastern side of the ridge. His name was Garrett Fenn, and he was the kind of man who made himself easy to underestimate. He dressed like a merchant, spoke like an educated man, kept his violence entirely off stage where it wouldn't disturb the performance of reasonability he maintained as his primary instrument. He had come through Cinder Creek in late autumn under the cover of a land survey contract, legitimate paperwork, legitimate instruments, a hired hand to carry them, and within 2 days had identified Cal Morris as a useful lever. Fenn knew about the eastern meadow because Fenn had used it. 4 years ago, before Elias Cord had properly mapped his own claim's eastern boundary, Fenn and 2 associates had spent 3 weeks in that high meadow doing business they did not want documented. The kind of business conducted between men who needed a place no law would accidentally wander into. By the time Elias had discovered the camp, long abandoned by then, Fenn and his associates had moved on. But they'd left things behind. Things buried. Things that, if discovered and traced, would be catastrophic for men who had since built themselves new and respectable identities. Fenn had come back to retrieve what was buried. Simple as that. Except Elias Cord was now living directly between Fenn and the meadow, with a wife, and what appeared to be permanent intentions. Morris was easy to recruit. Fenn found the deputy's grievance in about 40 minutes of conversation and attached his own purposes to it like a burr. He offered money, official-sounding justifications, and the seductive narrative that removing Cord from the mountain would be both profitable and right. Morris didn't ask about the specifics. Men with grievances rarely do. They just need the permission structure and the company. They came up the mountain on the second week of December, 6 of them, at 3 in the morning. No stars, cloud cover had moved in the day before, dropping the temperature and eliminating visibility past 20 yards. They brought lanterns they didn't light. They moved slowly, carefully, in single file on the trail Fenn had memorized from his previous visit. Elias heard them at 2 in the morning. Not the men themselves. The mountain told him, that particular quality of disturbed silence radiating down from the south ridge like a stone dropped in still water sends rings outward. He lay in the dark for exactly 60 seconds, processing. Then he rose without waking Clara, dressed without a lamp, and took the rifle from its place beside the door. He did not wake her because there was work to do that he needed to do without dividing his attention. This was a decision that would matter later in ways he couldn't predict. He went out the back of the cabin, which had a door he'd cut specifically for the purpose of exiting while someone watched the front. The cold hit him like a wall. He moved into the pines to the east of the cabin, upslope, using the treeline as cover, making the mountain take his footsteps back into itself the way a skilled man becomes part of his terrain. He saw them before they saw the cabin. 6 men. Morris in the lead with a lantern now lit, discipline breaking down as anxiety overrode caution. 2 men he recognized as Cinder Creek locals. 3 he didn't know. And the three he didn't know moved differently from the two he did. They moved the way men move when violence is their practiced occupation rather than their improvised emergency. Garrett Fenn was in the middle, and even at 30 yards in bad light, Elias recognized the quality of a man directing a situation from a position of deliberate remove. Elias stepped out of the trees behind them. "Morris," he said. The 6 men froze. Turned. The reaction was instruction. The 3 professionals reached for weapons. The 2 locals stumbled backward. Morris went pale. And Fenn went very still with the preternatural calm of someone who'd been in many dangerous rooms and survived by treating panic as an amateur mistake. "You know what's in the East Meadow?" Fenn said. Not a question. "I know what's buried there," Elias said. "Took me a while to understand what it was. Longer to know whose it was." He kept the rifle level. "I've got a written account of every item, with dates, sealed and with a man in Ridgeline who sends it to the county sheriff if I don't check in monthly." Fenn studied him. "That's a sophisticated arrangement for a mountain man." "I read," Elias said. Morris found his voice. "Cord, you don't have to, Morris," Elias said quietly. "Go home. Take your men. Leave Fenn." Silence. The wind moved through the pines above them. "You let us go," Morris said. "I want you gone more than I want you punished. Take that for what it is." Another silence. Then Morris looked at the 2 locals, looked at Voss and Doyle who'd apparently come up again, looked at the ground. Something settled in him. He turned to Fenn. "This isn't what you told me it was. Morris, this isn't what you said." Morris stepped back. Looked at Elias. "Send the account? Let the sheriff sort it." He turned and walked back down the trail, and after a moment the others followed, leaving Fenn standing alone in the cold. Garrett Fenn looked at Elias for a long time, calculating. Then, with the pragmatism of a man who knew when a position was genuinely lost, he said, "Name a price." "I don't want your money," Elias said. "I want you to stand trial. And I'd like you to begin walking to Ridgeline right now, because the alternative involves considerably less walking." Fenn walked. Elias followed him down the mountain with the rifle and the cold certainty of a man who had protected something real, and who intended to keep doing so. He didn't know what he'd find when he got back to the cabin. He didn't know Clara had woken to his absence and had sat for 2 hours in the rocking chair he'd built, still unfinished. Still just the curved runners and the beginnings of the seat, holding herself in the dark and listening to the mountain for any signal of what was happening to her husband. He didn't know she'd gone to the back room. He didn't know she'd sat beside the cradle with her hand resting on its carved side, those tiny sparrows and small mountains smooth under her fingers, and made a promise to whatever was forming inside her, that this child would know its father. That she would not let the world outside take what she had found inside this mountain. That she was done, completely and finally done, with the direction that other people pointed when they said this way and meant safe and meant small and meant known. Elias Cord brought Garrett Fenn to Ridgeline on a Tuesday. Walking 6 hours through December cold with the rifle on his shoulder, and the sealed account already waiting with the land agent who'd been holding it for 8 months. Fenn was tried in March. He was convicted of crimes that required 7 separate charges to fully describe. 2 of his associates, located in separate counties, were brought in subsequently. The contents of the East Meadow, financial records, correspondences, and the documented evidence of a scheme that had defrauded land claimants across 3 territories, became the foundation of cases that ran for 2 years in courts as far as Denver. Cal Morris testified truthfully. He resigned his position, which was the right thing, and went south, which was probably also the right thing. Elias came home to the mountain after Ridgeline, and Clara was waiting at the porch, and she did not ask him what happened right away. She put her hand on his face first, the way you check something you were afraid to lose, and he held still and let her. She told him about the baby in the spring. Which is to say, she told him officially, out loud, in daylight, even though they had both known for months. She did it in the back room, sitting on the floor beside the cradle, the way she'd sat on the floor the first time she'd seen it, and she said, "I think it's time we brought this into the main room. Don't you?" He picked it up like it was made of light, carried it through to the place by the south window where the afternoon sun came in long and warm. Their daughter was born in August, in that clean mountain light. Elias delivered her himself because the mountain road was flooded and there was no one to send for. He had read the medical texts. He had been quietly preparing for this for months, the way he quietly prepared for everything, without announcement, without drama, without asking for credit. Clara told him afterward, when everything was settled and the world had contracted to the size of a room with the right people in it. "You're nothing like what they said." He was quiet a moment, looking at the daughter in the cradle, the carved sparrows, the small mountains. "What did they say? That you were born wrong?" He thought about that. About the first wife. The first baby. The 5 winters of building towards something he had no evidence was coming, because the alternative was building toward nothing, and he had never been able to accept nothing as the destination. "Maybe I was," he said. "And then built myself right." Clara Cord looked at her husband, and she looked at her daughter in the cradle that had waited 5 years for this exact wait. And she thought about every person in Cinder Creek who had pointed her toward the safe road, the known road. The road that would have taken her somewhere comfortable and hollow and smaller than she deserved. She thought about what you miss when you decide you already know what someone is. She thought about what you find when you climb the mountain anyway. Outside, the summer valley held its impossible green, and the creek ran steady to the east, and the sparrows, real ones, the actual birds, moved through the pines in their small and purposeful way. The cradle rocked. And for the first time in a very long time, the mountain was not quiet because it was empty. It was quiet because it was full. Some men are born wrong, the town said. But maybe what they meant was, born in the wrong place. And maybe the difference between a man who builds a cradle in silence for 5 years and a man who never builds anything at all is simply the question of whether anyone ever bothered to climb the mountain and look.